Okay, so let's start with another emergency case management in pediatrics, that is head injury. I'm going to read it from the emergency book Suchitra Ranjit from page number 256. Let's start. Head injury is a common clinical problem in the pediatric population. Most injured children have minor head injuries, right? Mostly what they have minor head injuries and will have a good clinical outcome. However, it is important to identify promptly the small number that are at risk of developing the intracranial complications following the head trauma and subsequently deteriorate, resulting in the severe neurological deficits, even death. Although children have a better survival rate than the adults with the traumatic brain injury, the long-term sequelae are more devastating in children due to their age and developmental potential. What this meant was that children have better survival rates in case of any brain injury, but their prognosis, I should not say prognosis, but it is more devastating in children because they have to develop further, right? The brain is not fully developed, so that will affect the development of the brain further, any trauma. Why do children suffer greater damage following the traumatic brain injury? Greater head to torso ratio, higher angular biomechanical forces. This is the reason that they will suffer greater damage, right? Because there is the head is larger as compared to their torso. High brain water content, incomplete axonal myelination, and immature brain has increased susceptibility to delayed cell death. Significant cervical spine injury may be associated with the brain injury, although less commonly in children compared to adults. Care to stabilize and support the cervical spine during all the maneuvers involving the neck, such as intubation and shifting from bed to stretcher, etc., is essential in order to avoid the potential spinal injury that can lead to catastrophic consequences, right? So, when shifting, we have to follow all the cervical spine maneuvers involving the neck so that there is no injury to the cervical spine. Otherwise, it can lead to consequences such as paraplegia or respiratory muscle paralysis. Fine, the precaution must be continued until the cervical spine is cleared. Now, what are the risk factors for the significant brain injury? Significant mechanism of injury, that is high velocity injuries, example the motor vehicle accidents and fall from the height. These are the risk factors that brain is being injured, right? When the mechanism of injury is high velocity and motor vehicle accident and fall from height. If there is loss of consciousness, altered loss of consciousness and irritable, and GCS is less than 13, then there are chances of brain injury. When skull fracture or particularly if depressed, then there is chance of brain injury. There are penetrating injury or there is evidence of skull base fracture, and evidence of skull base fracture can be seen by raccoon eye or battle sign or CSF rhinorrhea or hemotympanum, right? What are the features that we will see in the skull fracture from the base? Raccoon eye, battle sign, CSF rhinorrhea and hemotympanum, and focal neurological sign. Or there can be severe worsening headache and persistent vomiting. Post-traumatic seizure can also hint towards brain injury, and patients with the blood dyscrasias or on anticoagulant therapy. 90 to 95% of all the head injuries are mild and may be discharged after parents are educated regarding the danger signs and prevention. Children with the moderate and severe head injury will require rapid evaluation and resuscitation at the emergency department in conjunction with the neurosurgeon. Traumatic brain injury pathophysiology. Let's look at the pathophysiology. What happens is the pathophysiology of the head injury is divided into two events, a primary injury and a secondary injury. A primary injury occurs within seconds of the traumatic event and no specific therapy is available apart from prevention, right? So when the child had the trauma, the injury that occurred within seconds of the traumatic event, that is called as the primary injury. And secondary injury includes the endogenous evolution of the brain damage or intracranial hypertension and secondary extracerebral insults such as hypotension, hypoxia and hypercarbia. Right, it is the damage that even occurred later. Like there can be conditions which lead to hypotension or hypoxia or hypercarbia, which will damage the brain. Or there can be intracranial hypertension also, right? Secondary insults can be modified or prevented by appropriate interventions. The goal of the ER and the PICU care are to optimize the neurological outcome by preventing the secondary injury. So in the ER and the PICU, we have to, primary injury has already occurred. We have to prevent the secondary injury, right? Now the severity of traumatic brain injury, it is divided into mild, moderate and severe. Let's look at the mild one. There is no loss of consciousness in the mild traumatic brain injury, and there is one or less episodes of vomiting, stable, alert, conscious state, may have scalp bruising or laceration, and normal examination otherwise. Fine. So what we saw in mild, no loss of consciousness, only one or less episode. What is less? No vomiting, right? And stable, alert, the patient is conscious, stable and alert. There may be scalp bruising or laceration, but otherwise normal examination. What happens in moderate traumatic brain injury? There is a loss of consciousness, right? There was no in mild, but there is loss of consciousness, but for less than 5 minutes. Alert or response to voice, may be drowsy. Fine. The child that in the mild one was conscious, alert and stable, but here it may be drowsy also, but responds to voice. 2 or more episodes of vomiting is seen in moderate one. There is a persistent headache and up to one single brief convulsion occurring immediately after the impact, right? There might be a single brief less than 2-minute convulsion just after the impact. Then also it is counted in moderate traumatic brain injury and may have large scalp bruise, hematoma or laceration. Normal examination otherwise. What happens in the severe traumatic brain injury? There is loss of consciousness for more than 5 minutes and there is decreased conscious state, right? Responsive only to pain or unresponsive. Fine. So the conscious state is altered in this and the child responds only to pain or is either unresponsive. There is a CSF leak from the nose or ears and localizing neurological signs like unequal pupil and lateralizing motor weakness are present. This was all about the severe traumatic brain injury. There are other signs also, like there can be signs of increased intracranial pressure, and if signs of increased intracranial pressure are present, then it will be a severe traumatic brain injury, right? And what will be the signs of increased intracranial pressure? That is uncal herniation and central herniation. Let's look at them. Uncal herniation, there is ipsilateral dilated non-reactive pupil. The side which the head injury is present, on that side the pupil will be dilated and non-reactive due to the compression of oculomotor nerve, right? That is due to uncal herniation. And what happens due to central herniation? Brainstem compression causing bradycardia and hypertension, right? What will be present in these are the signs of intracranial pressure. You have to look in the patient if bradycardia is present or if hypertension is present. These are the signs of brainstem compression, and this is occurring due to the increased intracranial pressure. And if increased intracranial pressure is present, then that is classified under the severe traumatic brain injury. So if bradycardia and hypertension, severe traumatic brain injury. Simple. Penetrating head injury, seizures other than the single brief less than 2 minutes that we read. Other than that, if any seizure or convulsion occur immediately after the impact, then that is counted under the severe traumatic brain injury, right? Causes of the raised ICP after the TBI. Okay, what are the causes now? Intracranial causes can be present and systemic causes can be present. Intracranial causes like focal impact damage, focal or diffuse cerebral edema, hematoma, diffuse axonal injury and seizures. These are all the intracranial causes, fine. And what are the systemic causes? Hypotension, ischemia, hypoxia, hypercarbia, hyperthermia and agitation. These were all the causes, systemic causes causing increased ICP. Now let's look at the cerebral edema. Cerebral edema is a consistent reaction of the brain to a variety of insults. While it may not be apparent at the outset, cerebral edema usually develops 24 to 72 hours and results in the increased ICP, right? So cerebral edema does not occur immediately, right? It will take around 24 to 72 hours and it will result in the increased intracranial pressure. There are 3 types of cerebral edema: vasogenic, cytotoxic and interstitial. In vasogenic type, the protein-rich edema fluid due to the blood-brain barrier defect, inflammatory or traumatic in origin, right? So the edema fluid will be rich in protein because of a defect in the blood-brain barrier. In cytotoxic one, there will be neuronal swelling. Why? Due to the disruption of intracellular machinery or cellular membrane function. Fine, due to these causes there will be neuronal swelling in the cytotoxic one. and cause may be traumatic, inflammatory, or hypoxic ischemic. Interstitial, increased intraventricular pressure due to obstruction of the normal CSF pathways, right? So in the normal CSF pathway there is obstruction which will cause the increased intraventricular pressure. Patient with the head injuries usually have a mixed type of edema, that is cytotoxic and vasogenic. So in vasogenic the protein will be high in the edema fluid, and inside, due to the cytotoxic one, there will be neuronal swelling, right? Neuronal swelling, right? Now coming to the types of head injuries. First, let's look at the Wolff fractures, then we will look at the intracranial air, then intracranial hematoma, and then diffuse axonal injury, right? These are, we have to read this under 4 headings, types of head injury. Let's start. A blow to the skull results in the compression injury to the adjacent brain, that is scoop, and stretching on the opposite side, that is counter coup. This may result in the contusion, shearing injuries, and rupture of the intraaxial or extraaxial vessels, leading to hemorrhage. Wolff fractures. These are indicative of severity of the injury, right? Uncomplicated fractures are not of great significance, except the temporal bone fractures may predispose to extradural hematoma. Depressed skull fractures, these may require surgery to elevate the bone fragment. These are well demonstrated on the CT. Right. So what happened is, in depressed skull fracture there will be a depression, right? So we require surgery to elevate the bone. Now in base of skull fractures, there are these are not always visible on the CT, but blood in the sinus cavities may be seen, like sphenoid sinus, suggests their presence. If the patient has clinical evidence of base of skull fracture, example the CSF rhinorrhea, or bleeding from the external auditory meatus, a normal CT does not exclude such fracture. What is important here is, if there is fracture of base of skull, so what can be seen is there will be CSF rhinorrhea, that is CSF will be coming out from the nose, and bleeding from the ear, external auditory meatus, right? And if in CT it can show a normal CT, but that does not exclude such a fracture. Like base of skull fracture is not excluded by a normal CT. Recognition of the base of skull fracture is important, as such patients are prone to developing meningitis and require antibiotic prophylaxis. Intracranial air. This indicates an open head injury, such as due to the basal fracture communicating with sinuses, or a penetrating injury to the vault. Right? What is happening is, due to an open head injury, such as basal fracture, which communicates with the sinuses, or there is a penetrating injury to the wall, so there will be intracranial air will enter via this open head injury, and this will again need antibiotics. Intracranial hematoma, it can be of various types, like extradural hematoma, or acute subdural hematoma, or traumatic subarachnoid hemorrhage, right? We have read all this in forensic medicine. An intracerebral hemorrhage, right? Let's start with the extradural hematoma outside the dura. This arises between the inner table of the skull and the dura. They usually develop from the injury to the middle meningeal artery. This is an important thing that we should remember, and or one of its branches, and therefore are usually temporoparital in location. They are usually where? Temporoparital. Which one? Extradural one. The expanding hematoma strips the dura from the skull. This attachment is quite strong, such that the hematoma is confined, giving rise to characteristic biconvex shape with a well-defined margin. Right. So the hematoma is what? Is confined, which will give rise to a characteristic shape, that is biconvex shape, something like this. So biconvex shape will be seen with a well-defined margin, right? It may present as a primary depressed consciousness, or a loss of consciousness following a lucid interval. Fine. So the patient may be with low consciousness, and there may be loss of consciousness after following a lucid interval. The bleeding is usually acute and so of high attenuation on the CT. There is often significant mass effect with the compression of the ipsilateral lateral ventricle and dilation of the opposite lateral ventricle due to obstruction of the foramen of Monro. So what we saw here is, what was happening here was, there was a hematoma and there was a well-defined margin, right, to the hematoma. So, and the attachment to the skull was strong. So this gives rise to a mass. Significant mass effect is present because of this hematoma, which will compress the same side lateral ventricle, and so that's why there will be dilation of the opposite lateral ventricle. Why is this happening? Due to the obstruction of foramen of Monro. What was important here? Biconvex shape and well-defined margin. Now let's read about the subdural hemorrhage below the dura. Clinical presentation depends on the size and the location of the presence of the associated injury. Subdural hemorrhage can have severe consequences due to the mass effect requiring urgent surgery because it is present below the dura, no? So then it will like directly impact the brain. So there, surgery might be required in case of any mass effect. Differentiating subdural hematoma and extradural hematoma is therefore not so important in the acute situation. The blood is again of high attenuation but may spread more widely in the subdural space, right? Because below the dura the space is more space is there for the blood to spread, and this will appear as a crescentic appearance and more irregular margin, inner margin, right? Associated brain parenchymal injury is common because it is just above the brain, right? Right, there will be pia and arachnoid matter, but still just dura is covering the brain, so there will be associated brain parenchymal injury. Now coming to the traumatic subarachnoid hemorrhage, this may occur alone or in association with the other intracerebral or extracerebral hematomas, right? The presence of the traumatic subarachnoid hemorrhage signifies a significant mechanism of injury and prognosis for recovery may be guarded. What this tells is there is a significant mechanism of injury. There will be some high velocity or fall from a greater height, right? Increased attenuation is seen in the CSF spaces over the cerebral hemisphere in the basal systems or the ventricular system. What this means is, so blood appears more white on the CT, right? So what's happening is in subarachnoid hemorrhage there will be blood present instead of CSF in the arachnoid area, right? So usually there is hypodensity present because CSF is present there, but because of the subarachnoid hemorrhage the blood will be present there, which will appear hyperdense. Attenuation, increased attenuation means there will be hyperdensity, right? Now moving further, subarachnoid hemorrhage may be complicated by hydrocephalus. Confusion can sometimes arise between the subarachnoid hemorrhage due to trauma and due to ruptured aneurysm, right? So we might get confused, right, if the bleeding is occurring due to an aneurysm or a trauma or arteriovenous malformation. The patient may collapse and hit his head as a result of bleed, and the history is important. We have to ask about the history, right? If there is any aneurysm rupture, then the trauma might not be present. There might not be history of any trauma to the patient, right? Now intracerebral hemorrhage contusion. These occur due to the stretching and shearing injury, often due to the impaction of the brain against the skull on the side opposite to the injury. Thus they may be seen directly opposite to the impact site, ranging from the subcutaneous hematoma, fracture or extradural hematoma, right? We have read this in forensic medicine also, that what is happening here is there will be the directly opposite to the impact site, ranging from subcutaneous. Wait, 1 second. So this intracerebral hemorrhage now is occurring on the opposite side of the head injury, right? This was what I was getting confused. This is occurring on the opposite side. So it is seen directly opposite to the impact site, and it can be a subcutaneous hematoma or a fracture or an extradural hematoma on the opposite side of the injury. The inferior frontal lobes and the anterior temporal lobes are the common site after a blow at the back of the head. So when there is an injury in the back of the head, its opposite side will be injured. It will have intracerebral hemorrhage. So for the back of the head, the opposites is inferior frontal lobes and the anterior temporal temporal lobes, right? Now coming to the diffuse axonal injury. Diffuse axonal injury can result in multiple contusion and petechial hemorrhages throughout the cerebral hemisphere. So if there are multiple contusion, then there are high risk of diffuse axonal injury. It is a very serious condition. These occur due to shearing injury with rupture of small intracerebral vessels, and in comatose patient with no other obvious cause, they imply a severe diffuse axonal injury with the poor prognosis. Diffuse axonal injury may be present up to 50% of the severe traumatic brain injury. Petechial hemorrhages are often very small and visible at the grey and white matter interface. Right, there will be small hemorrhages inside the cerebral matter, and in the grey and white matter, there will be petechial hemorrhages visible at their interface. Larger hemorrhages may occur in the severe trauma, and they may not be apparent on the scan performed immediately after the injury, only becoming prominent after a day or two. Right. So larger hematoma takes time to be shown on the CT, and it will be visible after a day or two. MRI is more sensitive to diffuse brain injury, particularly in absence of any hemorrhage. Types of presentation of the diffuse axonal typical presentation of diffuse axonal injury is significant mechanism of injury. So how will a patient with diffuse axonal injury present? It will be a deeply comatose patient in the CT that shows cerebral edema and poor grey-white differentiation. Right, this will be seen in the CT, and patient will be in the comatose state. What will be seen? Cerebral edema and poor grey-white differentiation. Plus, there may or may not be a petechial hemorrhage. Petechial hemorrhages might be seen, might not be seen, but no discrete hematoma or contusion. But we are not able to identify any hematoma, right? Any biconvex or any crescent shaped hematoma will not be seen, right? Now the management part will be seen in the next part. Thank you.